Our next guest knows how to keep readers on the edge of their seats. After building a career as a travel writer, she turned her attention to writing crime thrillers, and now she's 8 novels in. She recently stopped by Murder by the Book to celebrate her latest release, Every Lie I Told. But today she joins us from New York City. Good morning, Hilary Davidson.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Oh, absolutely, because we love this stuff. But I'm going to go back kind of over the pages of your life. As a kid, you fell in love with a book you got on ancient Egypt. What was it that just attracted you to that book?
Oh, I was obsessed with ancient Egypt when I was a kid. I think it was a combination of the mythology, because I loved sort of all kinds of mythology, the art, and I actually started writing my own stories about ancient Egypt, I think inspired by that.
Yeah, but it inspired you to write. And at 8, you won a Scholastic Short Story contest. When you win the Scholastic Short Story contest, I always entered but I never won. When you win that, that gives you, the chops to keep going. You also wrote for newspapers through high school and college, and you loved the dark side of storytelling, which I think a lot of us do. We're just naturally attracted to that. Why?
It's funny. I sort of joke that there's this continuum that I was on because my grandmother got me started on Nancy Drew books when I was a kid, and I just loved those. And I graduated from those to Agatha Christie novels when I was maybe 11 or so, and sort of just devoured her books and, fell in love with that. And then moved on to Robert B. Parker and Sarah Paretsky and Walter Mosley. And there was this sort of, then Patricia Highsmith, like sort of getting darker and darker and darker in my reading as I went along. But just, I sort of discover an author and fall in love and want to read everything they did. And in the case of someone like Agatha Christie, I mean, that woman wrote too many books. I don't think I've read them all even yet. But, I'd read dozens of them and then kind of move on to another writer.
It touches on that thing that all humans fear, and that's fear, right? Of what could happen.
I think very relatable. And I think honestly that all of us have this little game of what if that we play in our mind. We sort of think sometimes about, well, if this went really wrong, what would I do? And what if this happened? How would I respond? And I feel like a lot of the crime novels, the great ones, they're not focused on people who are career criminals. They're about normal people who get into bad circumstances and what do they do to cope with that?
Yeah, and in that way, it could be all of us. Okay, oftentimes when there's something that we love, we think, well, that can't be a living, could it? You came from a blue-collar family, which kind of underscored what I'm talking about. You felt like, I can't just go off and write fiction. I need to do something that's a solid career. So what did you go to college wanting to major in? And did you ever think that at that time, maybe I can figure out how like doing fiction writing could really become a living? Because you ended up doing a career that was related to writing, obviously.
Right, exactly. So if you'd asked me when I was a kid what I wanted to do, absolutely, I would say I want to write stories, I want to write novels. And it never occurred to me for a minute that that could really be a career that I could do. But I did feel like I could write with words. And, everyone who knew me always knew that I was writing and loved that. So being an editor seemed like a natural fit. So when I did go to college, I actually did a double major in English and political science, and figuring that would give me, something to, be able to edit.
But you ended up with Farmer's Travel Guides and Martha Stewart Weddings. Still, that sounds like a fun job to me. But
I went on to write, or work for a couple of different magazines, and really, really lucky to do that. I met great people, got to work on great pieces, but I always had this itch to write at the same time, and I sort of dipped my toe in by freelancing. And the really funny thing was that I loved travel, but I also couldn't really afford to go anywhere. I'm from Toronto originally, so what I started doing was pitching stories about my hometown to newspapers and magazines, and some of them were crazy. There would be like a very specific type of museum. There's a museum dedicated to shoes called the Bata Shoe Museum. And so I actually broke into Discover magazine writing a piece about this shoe museum, which, just really strange, esoteric thing. But it was stuff like that. Like I basically pitched what I knew and built my career out from there.
So now I know why your characters are so good and juicy and full, because you're a good, juicy, full character yourself. All right, your first book, Damage Done, published in 2010, won various Best First Novel awards. Again, another thing that kind of makes you realize that you're doing the right thing. And your writing process, every writer has a different writing process. You don't outline books before writing. It's funny because sometimes if you go online and go, how do I start writing writing a book, they go, well, we all learned in school, you start with an outline. What do you start with?
Right. That's what people tell you if you're a serious writer. You've got to do this outline. And I am a seat of the pants writer. For me, it begins with character. I have no trouble thinking of scenarios and ideas, but it's not until I really hear the voice of a character in my head that I'm sort of ready to go. Because it's like, okay, I'm going to be traveling with this person in my head for a few months while I write this draft of this book. So I need to hear them really clearly. And what I do is I basically give myself permission. My first draft is really just following that character. I don't always understand the plot or how they get from point A to point B. And I give myself permission to leave that until the second draft.
And somehow it all comes together, and it's come together for a number of books for you. The next one to fall, Evil in All Its Disguises, Blood Always Tells, One Small Sacrifice, Don't Look Down, Her Last Breath. Coming up with titles, that's a process in itself, isn't it?
That is so tough. It's the last thing I do. I know some writers who can't begin to write a book until they have a title. For me, it's the very last step of the process, and I'm always praying that I will come up with something good at the end.
And you do. Okay, you come up with Every Lie I Told. Tell us about this book. And are your books in a situation where you really have to be familiar with previous characters to really pick up the next book, or can you read them all out of order? I get so excited about reading books. Yeah, because sometimes I bought the same book twice. I'm like, oh, no wonder that sounded familiar.
Yeah. It's no, what I would say that the three that I started with, The Damage Done was the first book in a series. So those first three books, it would be best to read them in order. But the other ones you could pick up in any order. And Every Lie I Told is a standalone psychological thriller. I do put in little Easter eggs that connect my books to each other, but there's nothing that you would need to know previously. You can absolutely dive in. You might just recognize another minor character from another book later if you pick one up.
This is not a typical whodunit. Readers know early on who committed the crime.
Yeah. So in this case, the book begins with a woman, she's a PR fixer named Jackie Swift, getting a call from her sister saying that she's at a party, she's overdosed, and she needs Jackie to come over and rescue her. Jackie goes over to the house, discovers there's no party, her sister is not there, but there is a man's dead body. And Jackie thinks that she knows what's going on. She knows the man. Like I say, she's a fixer. She's done work for him. She's helped cover up her crimes. She knows her sister had a grudge against him, and she figures that basically her sister killed this man and wants help covering up the crime. And so Jackie goes into disaster management mode, which she's very good at, but it leads her into a very dark spiral because, of course, she needs to find someone else to sort of put in front of the police to blame them for the crime. So she goes down a really dark path in this book.
Yeah, and we're all left asking ourselves, if our sister did this, would we help her or throw her to the wolves? I don't know. All right.
It's a common question, right? Yeah. Like, would you help me, move a body? Would you help me hide a body?
It's like, girl, what were you thinking? Okay. Hilary, thank you so much for joining us this morning, and congratulations on all of your success.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to talk to you.
All right. You can purchase your copy of Every Lie I Told wherever books are sold, but you can find a signed copy by Hilary Davidson at Murder by the Book, which is such a great local bookstore here that brings a lot of wonderful authors to town.